Alright, y'all. I'm finally gonna go over communism. I know. Y'all have been asking for this for a while. I mean, the Marxist community was practically begging me to do this one. Now, I'm probably planning to make this like a 3-4 part series, just so you guys know every detail imaginable about communism and where it started, who were the big players. So we're gonna start with the man himself, the man of the hour, Big Daddy Karl Marx. You look at this guy and what's your first thought? This guy fucks. But besides that, he was a German writer who lived during the 1800s, which was when the Industrial Revolution was really having an effect on society. This was a time of upheaval for many European countries. Lots of people were moving away from farming and producing their own products to working for someone above them, usually in a factory. It was the start of large-scale capitalism. Now, before I really start this, I want to say that Marxism has kind of been used as an umbrella term to describe everything from Russia's Leninism, which, I'll probably cover in the next video, to really anything that criticizes capitalism in today's social order. So for the first part of this video series, I'm going to be focusing mainly on what Marx's ideology himself was and his own writings. Now, I sparks noted the Communist Manifesto, so I think I know what I'm talking about. So, you can trust me, I've been a Marxist since day one. I'll send a couple bourgeois to the gulags, if you know what I'm saying, like I'm down. But anyway, to understand Marxism, you need to understand its central tenets, which is mainly in class struggles. This is the idea that society is made up of different classes who are constantly in struggle with each other for power. Parts of this idea are still being used today to describe and study society. Marx thought that in society there would always be an oppressed majority and an oppressive minority. He thought that history and the present would be shaped by the oppressor, and that they would be the ones who controlled the means of productions, which at the time he considered to be the bourgeoisie. He thought that the modern and final class conflict would be between these bourgeoisie, like the factory owners, investors, landlords, and then the proletariat, which was what he considered to be the working class. I'll talk more about what he meant by the final class conflict later in the video. Now, to understand why Marx thought that the working class was being oppressed and abused, you have to understand what he considered value to be. He thought value wasn't in the price of the product or what market speculators considered the value to be. He thought that the average amount of work that it takes to make the product was what the value was. So how much effort and time it would take to make a table on average would be what its true value was. In his view, capitalism relied on a systematic exploitation of the workers and their labor. The bourgeoisie would only pay their workers a portion of what their labor was actually worth. The rest they would keep for themselves as profits. Since capitalism is found on the idea that more profit is good, these workers would get paid as little as possible to keep profit as high as possible. The worker is essentially making a product so that someone else can sell it for him, which he then gets paid a sort of measly compensation for the effort. This could be seen as exploitive, since the workers were not receiving near the amount that their labor was actually worth. And it's not something that's really hard to see today. I mean, when you have people in third world countries making hundreds of $1,000 iPhones while only getting paid $1 a day, it's easy to see how this could be exploitive. There's also an alienation of the worker from their work that comes with this, Marx said. Capitalism had made work specialized and detached. In a factory, this would mean you would attach a bulb onto the product, and maybe you do this boring task 1,000 times a day. Working at an office is similar, or a restaurant, a store, maybe meat processing. You are doing the same task over and over and over again. There is no pride or initiative in the work. In the past, you might make a chair or maybe a sword, and in that product that you made and owned, there was a piece of your soul, your morals, your aspirations. When someone bought your chair, they saw and knew that you were the person who made it. There was a genuine connection, a shared reality between the buyer and producer. Today, you will never know whose hands have made the thousands of material objects that you use every day. You will never have to look the 12-year-old boy who assembled your iPhone in the eyes. Marx considered this to cause alienation, a disconnect from the worker, the work they are actually doing, and who they really are as a person. Now all this is theory, so what made communism and Karl Marx a political movement also? Well, we have to go back to what Marx said, which was that this would be the final class conflict between the bourgeois and the proletariat. He thought that the proletariat rising up and stealing all of the property back from the bourgeoisie was something that was inevitable. He thought that historically this always happened. There would always be another class that would be oppressed who would eventually destroy the oppressor and then take over their role. But he thought that since the proletariat was the majority and they didn't really have any real power, that when they took over control they wouldn't just take on the role of the oppressor. He thought instead that classes would be abolished altogether, and that there would be no more private property. So what made this political? I mean, if it was gonna happen anyway, why did he have to write the book in the first place? Well, while Marx did think that this would be a natural occurrence that would just happen no matter what, he still thought that communists should organize to bring about this revolution sooner rather than later. And in one of his most famous lines, writing, "Workers of the world, unite! You have nothing to lose but your chains!" So that about wraps it up for the first part. Now you know. That's where communism started. I'll be making the next part probably around next week. It's gonna be a fun time. I'm gonna talk about Lenin. I'm gonna talk about Russia. There's gonna be a lot of murder. I'm talking about a fuck ton of murder. Should be a pretty good time. See y'all next week.